informed citizen, they make it almost impossible on purpose. It's like a full-time job to be a politician, that we're expected to know all of these things.
The history that we know now, that everyone's been taught over the last half century or so, as far as women's history, has been completely and totally gatekept by gender studies professors, feminists, feminist activists who are all in universities, where the actual Marxist feminists are. And so they have completely co-opted history and told women's history as a story of everything was terrible for women everywhere at all times throughout all of history up until the 19th Amendment in 1920.
TM, the feminism, it's about dominance, not equality, right?
Right. Yeah. Yep. And it's a whole industry. Mm-hmm. Like I said, there were no such thing as gender studies or women's studies departments prior to like the very late 60s, early 70s. Mm-hmm. It was really after Betty Friedan's book, The Feminine Mystique, came out that they turned this into an academic discipline. And they did that in order, number one, to rewrite the history, but number two, because this was all kind of wrapped up in the Congress for Cultural Freedom and some of those kind of things that were going on at the time, where the government decided this was something they kind of wanted to push. So they planted certain people in academia. They created these gender studies departments and these women's studies departments, and they started because universities are a really good place to start activism, political activism, and things like that. So yeah, it was the whole point is really that it was not some grassroots movement that women just looked around one day and went, oh my gosh, we're oppressed. Let's march in the street and protest until we get equal rights. It really wasn't like that. It was all very engineered from the beginning.
So what I like about your book is you went all the way back to the beginning of history, and you're talking about Inanna Ishtar Venus, mm-hmm. which I have done a lot of studies on too, in connection with like the Whore of Babylon and Aleister Crowley and Thelema and stuff like that. But Inanna, it's so weird because this goddess was actually hermaphroditic. And he says, I am woman, I am man. And cults worshipped Inanna by cross-dressing. And as you point out in your book, this is where we get a lot of the BDSM and dominatrix ideas, because she was a punisher, also the goddess of sex and war. Mm-hmm. Right? And then the Whore of Babylon is not a mother. Inanna had no children, so she's not like a fertility archetype, a mother archetype, anything like that. The first goddess was all about sex and destruction, like Kali, right?
Yes, and Kali, right in the beginning of the book, I show the very first cover of Ms. Magazine, which mm-hmm. was a Gloria Steinem CIA magazine. The very first cover was a picture of Kali, which, yes, right there. And they have her like with all these domestic items, uh-huh. but the real Kali always has like men's severed heads and men's severed arms, like in a bracelet or a belt around her. She's always holding severed heads of men there with blood everywhere, and she was a vengeful goddess who destroyed men on the battlefield and like drank their blood and ate them, and she was like very vengeful. And so you think to yourself, what a weird choice for a woman's magazine that was aimed at housewives in the early 70s. Mm-hmm. Why would you pick a bloodthirsty Hindu goddess for something like that?
So this Inanna Ishtar Kali conglomerate, they mashed up all of these goddesses to make the Scarlet Woman of Thelema. And actually, you said in your book, the people who worship Kali have been responsible for 2 million ritual murders, and they're called thugs, right?
Yes, that's where we get that. Yeah, that's where we get the word thug from. Yeah, is from this famous Hindu cult of mass murderers who killed people as a sacrifice to her. They think historians generally agree. I know that's kind of a loaded phrase to say, but generally they think this was like the largest mass murder cult that's ever existed.
Yikes.
Yeah.
Another thing about goddess worship is that it is always linked with temple prostitution. So this is not a liberating thing for womankind to be,
Well,
a Vestal virgin or a temple prostitute or something like that, right?
right. Well, you and I certainly wouldn't think of it that way. But if you see, I mean, spend 5 minutes on TikTok or Instagram right now, and you will see, I mean, how many women have an OnlyFans now? How many of them have um, social media accounts, OnlyFans, things like that, where all they do is like sell their sexuality, and it's always portrayed as this empowerment thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to use my sexuality to benefit me. I'm going to use it to get attention. I'm going to use it to get money. I'm going to use it to have power and control over the simps who are going to watch my stuff and send me money.
Mm-hmm.
It's so incredibly widespread and normal now with the PORN industry, and the internet. It's just like, if you even try to say, hey, maybe that's like, there used to be this back and forth between different factions of feminists where some of them were really against that and other ones were very pro free love and things like that. But now it's almost universally seen as like a you go girl thing to be the temple prostitute archetype. It's
I
seen as so
remember,
empowering.
I can't think of anything less empowering. And I remember this story that Isaac Weishaupt told about a pimp who was talking about his girls and talking about that there's a real phenomenon where they have a shelf life of like 10 years or under, because after that they're just going to have too many mental problems, too many drug problems, too many health problems. Nothing will destroy your mind, body, and soul faster than prostitution.
Yes, that's true. And now, not only has it been pushed on women like crazy, but it's been pushed on people who, let's call them transformers, people who go have certain therapies and surgeries done to try to change genders. I wrote another piece about how there's a whole MK Ultra like world of programming out there on the internet to convince these people not only to transition, but to pay for that transition, because it's very expensive. You've got to pay for hormones, surgeries, plastic surgeries, you need a whole new wardrobe, things like that. It's very expensive. So you should prostitute yourself in order to pay for this. So we're seeing it there too. And it's all very related to human trafficking as well. Like I said, it's big business now. These departments at universities get huge donations. They get funding. Like, I've done a lot of work on the funding behind different parts of academia and where it comes from. It always comes from the same big foundations, the same big NGOs that Jay does talk a lot about, things like Rockefeller Foundation, Luce Foundation, all these big name, ultra elite philanthropy foundations. And they donate money based on who's pushing what they want them to push. And they award professorships to people based on what they're going to be, how they're going to be teaching and what they're going to be teaching. So there's a vested interest to portray all of history as this evil, oppressive patriarchy and convince young people that, this is where the ideas of things like toxic masculinity come from. And that whole movie, that's a propaganda piece too. The Stepford Wives is definitely a propaganda piece written to try to like show this life of marriage and family being a happy, good thing as a myth that never really existed, as something that you only find in old Hollywood movies and romance novels. And that if you're a smart woman, and if you know your self-worth, you're going to get a career, make money, have your own money, probably not even have kids. And if you do, maybe have one. And definitely don't even think about it until you've gotten your degree, you've established your career, and you're super financially set. Well, by the time any woman does that, she's probably in her mid-30s already. And so by that time, a lot of women, like, what are you going to do? Start looking for a husband at 35. Then by the time you find him, and by the time you get married, by the time you start having kids, you're 40. I mean, this is a big a big reason why the birth rate has dropped so much. I've done a ton of research on that as well. So yeah, they have a vested interest in pushing this sort of thing, and it's become a really big business. And each one of these huge universities around the West has a huge program with multi-million-dollar budgets to teach this stuff.
Yeah, I think getting women into the workforce is, you know, part of the racket of like collecting more taxes. Not only does it break down the family and take her away from the home and everything that she wants to do, and I mean, nobody really wants to have a job,
right? But now it's portrayed as the coolest, most awesome thing. Every woman's just born wanting a job. Haven't you always just wanted it? Didn't you dream about your job when you were 5 years old?
No, it's so funny. Okay, so let's take a little detour here because you said something that made me think. When I was growing up and I was like, you know, 16 to 20, the age where you're trying to figure out like what you want in life and the avenues you want to take, all I wanted was just a family. You know, I just wanted a Norman Rockwell existence where we had happy holiday times where nobody was getting in fist fights and crying and slamming doors. And I just wanted a peaceful family with lots of kids and a loving environment that was stable. But God had other plans for me, apparently. That's not what happened. That's what I wanted. But I think in my case, and a lot of other women's case, that was just not being offered to us.
Right.
So I don't think feminists are like born in a vacuum.
No.
It's like a series of abuses and lies and circumstances and things that they got into with relationships going awry and being lied to, being cheated on. You know, like when you think of feminists, you think angry.
Yeah.
So how did she get that way?
We've grown up in like fish swimming in water. We don't know we're in a feminist ethos where this is the way that everything is portrayed. This is the reality that's given to us. And then when we had the sexual revolution where everybody, you know, it's fine to sleep with whoever before you get married. Marriage is kind of an old passe institution. We've totally outgrown it. We're not even going to need it anymore.
But
you just have birth control. You can have abortions. It leads to this hookup culture, which does lend itself to abuse of women and exploitation of women. And it isn't good for us.
But like, if you're just a sincere woman wanting a family and to get married, you're almost treated like a grifter or something in the dating world.
Like a gold digger.
I would like to get married someday. And the guys were like, what's wrong with you? Why aren't you chill, girl? Like, you know, it's just so weird.
Yeah. And then the men, the thing that the men get brainwashed with is you can't trust women. They're all just out to take half your stuff and run off with the neighbor. Which does happen a lot. I mean, both sides, the grievances both sides have are real and they're valid in certain respects.
Right.
But we need the history to put all of that in context of like, how did we get here? Because it wasn't always that way. Like women weren't always pitted against men and men against women. We didn't always see each other as enemies. And like, so the woman thinks, oh, you're just out to take advantage of me. And the guy's like, no, you're just out to take advantage of me. And so it is very hard for people to get married and stay married.
Mm-hmm.
My second book I'm working on right now has a lot to do with like the Bolsheviks and Eastern Europe and Russia and what they were going through during the same time period from maybe the mid 1800s to now with their version of feminism, the Bolshevik Soviet flavor of feminism. And they actually did the same thing in the 20s. They had a women's department called the Zenitdel, which went into Central Asia and tried to liberate Muslim women. They had like unveiling campaigns, which led to like a lot of people getting murdered. And it was like a horrible failure. It was a terrible thing that they tried to do, but they tried to like forcibly make them feminist and try to, I mean, it contributed a lot to the situation that we have in Afghanistan and things like that now. So any type of modesty in women is oppression, right? I mean, what do we say about women anymore that does not basically constitute abuse or oppression? If your husband were to give you even the slightest constructive criticism, there'll be 100 feminists, and a lot of them don't even know they are. They think they're just a normal woman, and they'll be like, oh, he's oppressing you, that's abusive, that's toxic behavior, to the point that, like you were saying earlier, now it's getting hard for people to figure out what actually is dangerous, narcissistic, toxic behavior, because everything men do is portrayed that way. Mm-hmm. Where it's like, if a guy says, hey, you seem a little emotional right now, it's like, oh my gosh, how dare you? And people get so upset. So it's like, it's created this total chaos and this total dysfunction between the sexes and within families and throughout societies around the world, wherever this stuff goes. Had chivalry, and when that kind of started to end and we had the Enlightenment, one of the things that came out of the Enlightenment was like early feminism with Mary Wollstonecraft, and then a little bit later it was like Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and they actually rewrote the Bible. They wrote their own version of the Bible called the Woman's Bible. You can still buy it on Amazon right now. It's still in print. It's a really good selling book. Even at the time in the late 1800s, it was ridiculously successful. They had multiple runs of printing on it, and it went over the first 5 books of the Old Testament and took out references to Eve being the one who ate the fruit of the tree of knowledge. It took out anything they thought was patriarchal, and it tried to make it egalitarian, kind of similar to like what Jefferson did, where he took out the miracles. Or they want to tie those things together, I think, in order to, get to this new world order type of stuff that they're looking for, where it's like one world government, one world religion, no genders, no boundaries, just this big mishmash of everyone's just going to be in the blob and live in the pod and all that stuff.
One character, Noyes.
Yeah.
No, how do you say that?
I think it's Noyes.
Noyes. And talking about his ideas of complex marriage. So this is one of the crazy cultic ideas that came out of the colonizers' puritanical ways. And when it's funny because when you study cults, you realize how they're all alike, and they have so many, like, it's just like they have a formula, right?
They do.
And they always come to the conclusion of sharing wives, multiple wives.
Yeah, isn't that funny? Isn't it weird how anytime these people, because he was another one, like a lot of the modern day ones that you've covered and Jay's covered, where it's like, I am the Messiah and God told me to come here and that I'm going to be the new leader, or sometimes they even claim to be Jesus or something. Noyes was a guy who thought that he had stopped sinning, right? He figured out how to not sin, and he would tell people like, oh, I haven't sinned in 9 years or something like that.
Yeah.
Which is a really common thing. You see that with people like Teal Swan and some of these guru people that you guys have been doing such a great job with lately, where it's,
I'm the most spiritual person in the world.
Yeah, like
that's what she said. She's like, I feel like you're in resistance to me.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. It went way off the rails because he came to this idea that it was this idea of nobody owns anyone, like possession is wrong, very early communist type of stuff. And a lot of these Protestant,
this is in the 1800s, right? Like, very early.
I think he was like early 1800s.
Okay.
And it was very very like, we can't possess people, it's wrong and sinful to try to possess people, so we're not going to have marriage, we're all going to sleep with each other. And then it became everyone's obligated to sleep with everyone else, and then it became, I'm going to choose who gets to have the babies, and I'm going to pair you up, and you have to go through a process with me where I determine if you're like morally and spiritually sound enough to reproduce before you can. And so it went kind of crazy.
You said he actually coined the term free love. So that's where that comes from.
Yeah.
Way back when.
Yeah, and it's been a thing for a while now. I mean, you still see it. Other people picked up on it right after he did, but almost every social revolution that has anything to do with feminism that I've studied, this free love stuff comes up every time.
It always does.
It's got to be the same spirit behind this, going, hey, just have sex with everybody, it's all good, bro.
And like they will build an entire religion around it, like Mormonism. I've been looking a little bit into like Joseph Smith and Brigham Young and that whole story. It's a crazy story, for one.
Oh yeah. I tweeted something a while back going, whoa, if you guys have never done a deep dive into Mormons, like,
I'm about to do Mormon summer just because.
do it. You have to do it because they're still going really strong and they have so much political influence and money and power. And it's just like to start the very first Marxist newspaper in the country with that. Claflin and Woodhull's Weekly, she made that newspaper with her sister, and I believe she was the first person in America to publish the Communist Manifesto in English.
Oh, wow.
Because of the money she got from that.
Yeah.
So you'll always also find Marxism, communism, socialism stuff bound up in with this occult, feminist, espionage. It's just always a weird combination, and you find it everywhere. My goal with this stuff is more I want to make it cool to be a wife and mom again. I want those to be, if you're a little girl and your teacher says, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want a mom to be a perfectly acceptable answer, whereas right now it's not. If my daughters were in public school and a teacher said, what do you want to be when you grow up? And they said, I want to be a mom. The teacher would be like, no, what do you want to do with your life? Like they wouldn't even accept that as an answer. And it's a perfectly valid answer. And like women had so many really vital, important roles that they've abandoned because we've brainwashed them with this idea that unless you have a corporate career and you're making a paycheck and you have a 401k, you're like some kind of failure. Because I'm a weird paradox because I'm the stay-at-home mom, like I guess you'd call me kind of traditional, but I also lift weights and shoot guns. And I think that if you're going to be a mom of a bunch of kids, you have to be pretty tough. It's not easy, like motherhood and even being a wife, a lot to being a woman that's tough. So it's not this idea that we should be weak and coddled and taken care of and controlled at all. It's that it's perfectly fine for us in our God-given roles to be strong, good helpmates for the men in our lives and not see ourselves as like fundamentally pitted against them. Most little girls don't want to be an engineer. And this is where it's another Enlightenment idea that like everything is social. Everything's a social construct. You know, I wasn't born a female with feminine inclinations. I was just programmed by society to think I have to like female stuff and that I can't be an engineer because that's for boys. That's just, it hasn't worked out that way. And in countries like the Scandinavian countries where this was pushed the most, where egalitarianism was pushed the most for the longest, they've actually seen women going further and further away from things like STEM and more back to traditional things, artistic things, creative things.
I'm thinking of this meme that went around when they gave this little girl some trucks to play with. She fed him and tucked him in like as if they were babies. Like they had a picture of little trucks that were tucked in for the night. It was really funny. But
yeah, and just trying to push boys to want to be here, just trying to like cram everybody into the opposite thing to prove that that gender is a social construct. And like to a certain degree maybe it is, but I mean
I feel like
biological sex is a thing.
Part of feminism is not liking feminine things.
Yeah. It's to prove that like you're too smart and too tough and too cool for that
too
stuff.
Tough. But I feel like a lot of women, they haven't been lucky enough to find a nice person that will protect and provide for them. So they have to be in their masculine. It's not like they want to be there. They're being forced to be the man.
What does MGTOW and the manosphere teach? And what does feminism teach? It teaches that you should be getting what you want. They should be taking care of you. They should be doing something for you. They're not giving you what you need. They're not, girl, if he can't handle you at your worst, he don't deserve you at your best. That kind of thing. And it's that mentality. If you have that mentality, you will never have a good marriage. I can promise you. 100%. I will bet every bit I've got in my bank account that your marriage will fail if you're approaching it with that mindset, because that's not what it's about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I read something so funny now that they have overturned that court case. This girl posted, she's like, me and a lot of girlfriends got together and we had a little summit and we decided that we are no longer going to be intimate with people who don't have a contract with us. And good faith to raise any kind of baby that comes from this relationship. And I'm like, so marriage? Like,
Right.
you think
Right.
you invented marriage? It was like,
No sex then. You guys don't get any sex until and I was like, yeah, you got it. Now you're
yeah,
getting
right?
it. You're getting it now. But no, it's like these things, you can always tell if something is not good for you, if it's pushing you to like sleep with everybody. Communally raised children, that's another big one that always comes out of these weird
Yes. All the
feminist cults. It's
cults and
always,
gurus is always like, there is no family. It's just everybody.
yeah, it always ends up being this communal raising of children, which think about what that leads to. I mean, what is the obvious abuse that would come out of a situation where children are being raised communally? And we do have
I said that
historical examples of this
to
too.
Jay, I was like, it's so impractical. And you always hear people like, just like, if we could live in a commune, man.
Israel had this, and then the Soviet Union had experiments with these communist communes with communal raising of children, and the children who are survivors of those things always come out saying there was all different kinds of sexual abuse, ritual abuse, physical abuse. Yeah, it's a situation that specifically enables that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And we always end up there, right?